Welcome to Homespun, a special listener storytelling event on the ABC Radio Melbourne website and Facebook page.
Thank you. Well, the good news was that she was born healthy, happy, ruddy and radiant. She had blue eyes and pink skin. In fact, my newborn daughter, all of an hour old, she looked very English. And that's where we got the inspiration to call her Tess. Tess Astle. It had euphony, it had symmetry, it had all those beautiful S's curled up together like a basket of snakes. It also had all the one-point tiles in Scrabble. I was overjoyed, thrilled, not just at a new daughter, but a beautiful name. But there's a reason that all those letters only get 1 point in Scrabble, and that's because they're very easy to make an anagram out of. And that's the bad news. 2 days later, when I realised that my newborn daughter had a very unfortunate anagram as her name, I was terrified. I mean, if I was a taxidermist or an IT consultant, I would have been exonerated. Nothing would have been thought more about it. But if you make anagrams for a living, if you put together crosswords for the best part of 30 years, then you are accountable. In fact, as a taxidermist, I may as well have been one because I was stuffed and I was terrified. It's like one of those target puzzles. When you see all the 9 letters scrambled around, you either get the word straight away or you never see it. Now, I was hoping Tess would be in that latter category. If I didn't speak a word, if I just hid in my own cowardice, she would never know. About 3 or 4 months later, we got together those zany, gaudy letters that you get, the wooden ones that are made out of pelicans and clowns, and we blue tacked them to her door, just the first name only, Tess, and anyone could see that Tess is an anagram of sets. And I was happy with that, because that's harmless, that's innocuous. I was happy for Tess one day to discover that her first name is an anagram of sets. I could get away with that. But I did mention that she had blue eyes, and unfortunately, or fortunately, she sees the world much like her dad. And when she was about 4, we were shopping together in a supermarket and she said, "Dad, there's my name." And I looked up at the jars of mayonnaise and the tins of tuna and I said, "Where, darling? Where's your name?" And she pointed to the back of the supermarket, there above the Bain Marie, these big pink neon letters, Delicatessen. I knew my goose was cooked. I crouched down to her and I said, "Darling, it's not too late. You can be anything you want to be in your life. You can be a drummer, you can be a detective, you can be a wine grower. Just don't be a crossword maker. I mean, the pay's lousy, the job opportunities are scarce, and also, in my heart of hearts, I was thinking, and if you do take that pathway, you're going to realise that, in fact, your 9 letters has a very unfortunate anagram." I just didn't want that truth to come out. I was petrified. But then she was 8, was at grade 3. She came back from school and she looked me in the eyes and she said, "Dad, you'll never guess what we did today." I knew I could hear the drum beat. I knew the jig was up. And she said, "Every kid in the classroom, they did their own mammograms." I thought, wow, off the hook, mammograms, not a problem. Anagrams, big problem. But then she started to spell out what she did this afternoon. She actually put every letter of her name into the computer to see what mammogram she got. And she looked at me and she said, "And guess what, Dad?" "What?" I said, knowing what she was going to tell me. "I am the only girl in the whole school whose name holds not just 1 mammogram, but 2 mammograms. And I said, "2, what's the other one?" Now, if she was a detective, she would have realised I'd been sitting on the truth for 8 years. But she said, "Not just stateless, but tasteless." And I suddenly realised, as I held my breath, looking at my daughter, that here was a young girl who realised that she was now in her own word nerd province, that she was in her own space, that she was unique, and that she had bragging rights over everyone else in that school. And me, the idiotic, tasteless father, looked at her and hugged her, and I was absolutely delighted. And I swear that I am telling you the truth. Thank you. So this is Homespun, hosted by ABC Radio Melbourne. Thank you. And I am David Astle, the host of Evenings, and I'd now like to introduce the host of Mornings, Virginia Trioli.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, David. Please don't ever tell me what my three names are an anagram of. What Virginia Frances Trioli turns into, I just do not want to know. And what a fantastic way to kickstart Homespun, our inaugural storytelling competition. I may just share a story of my own a little later on. ABC Radio Melbourne acknowledges Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the traditional custodians of lands, waterways and skies across Australia. From Mulgana country in the west to Bundjalung country in the east. From Lutruwita in the south to Saibai Island in the Torres Strait. This continent is home to hundreds of different nations whose knowledge has helped shape and evolve our understanding of land and seas. Today we pay respect to elders past and present and recognise the contribution of all First Nation peoples to the land we live, learn and play on. Homespun is about celebrating you, our very dear listener, because we know that you all have a story. So a couple of months ago we asked you to tell us a story. The story had to belong to you and it had to feature the line, "I swear I'm telling you the truth."
And you lot do spin a great yarn. In fact, we love listening to every story of the many that were submitted, and a couple of hundred in fact, and we supplied a long list to our wonderful judges who decided on the top 5. Our studio audience with us will have the lucky opportunity to judge which of the stories is their favourite, so then we can crown a winner.
But on top of our wonderful listeners, we also have a few special guests who are ready to tell their stories today. Author Alice Pung, comedian and writer Jean Kittson, and former AFL footballer Liam Picken. Now, our first homespun storyteller was born in Zambia, but grew up in South Africa in a small mining town. She couldn't wait to escape it. She left a country that had no television, no voting rights for the majority black population, and no real political opposition against apartheid. She ended up in Australia and started working as a teacher. Linelle Gibson is now happily retired after a long career in and around education and enjoys writing short letters to the Age newspaper and they're always short, and is an avid listener to ABC Radio Melbourne.
My story happened exactly 1 year before 9/11, right here in Melbourne. But that wasn't the first time I met him. The first time I met him happened 10 years earlier when he first came to Australia. And I knew I was getting the opportunity to meet him, and I was dumbstruck. Now, anybody who knows me knows I'm never dumbstruck. My family would say, she can talk the leg off an iron pot, she can talk underwater. But what was I going to say to him? And I told my boss that I'd be too overwhelmed to say anything. So in a classic problem-solving, practical way, she said, "Well, you can write my speech." And I did. And that was the first time I met Nelson Mandela, because my boss just happened to be Joan Kerner. 10 years later, I had a second opportunity to meet Nelson. He came to Melbourne as part of the World Reconciliation Day. Both he and Rubin were invited to come and talk about their stories. Both were black men who'd spent more than 2 decades in jail unjustifiably. Rubin Hurricane Carter was a prize fighter and a boxer who was falsely accused of murder. Nelson Mandela was a human rights fighter, fighting for the freedom of his people. And they both had come to a point where they understood that you can only move forward when you are reconciled. So I was invited at the time by our local member and Premier, Steve Bracks. It was at the World Trade Centre, or Convention Centre, I think, and we were in a room to meet him before the big event. My memory of the day was that the room was full of incredibly tall men. There was Steve Bracks, who's pretty tall. There was the ever-affable Gustav Nottel, Sir Gustav Nottel, research biologist, who's very tall and smiley. There was the stony-faced, very tall Malcolm Fraser, who had in fact been part of the United Nations eminent group who had fought for the release of Nelson Mandela and had visited him in Robben Island. Urban myth has it that Mandela said to him, "Is Don Bradman still alive?" Urban jokes have it that Nelson Mandela said, "Have Collingwood won a premiership yet?" So I had a lot of admiration for these people who was in the room together. The door opened and a sort of rather loud, ockerish voice was heard, and a small man came into the room, and everyone flocked to him immediately. It was Bob Hawke, small man, big personality. And everybody went across to him. And I noticed a very dapper man standing in the corner on his own. So I went over to him and I introduced myself. And I said, "Are you part of the Mandela entourage?" And he said, "No, ma'am, I'm Rubin Carter." And I nearly fainted. I was expecting Denzel Washington. I was expecting a tall and rather aggressive, assertive man. And here was this very humble, rather small man standing quietly on his own. No fanfare. And I loved him for that. So I said to him, "Do you know that as a young man, Nelson Mandela enjoyed boxing? Have you met him?" And he said, "No, I haven't met him. And my friends, they say to me, 'Rubin, what you going to do what you going to say when you meet the man?' And I tell them, I'm going to say, 'Nelson Mandela, I loves you.'" And at that moment, a door opened and in walked the incredibly statuesque, dignified, grey-haired Nelson Mandela with a big smile on his face. And he came up to Rubin Carter and I with his hands up like this, pretending to shadow box. And Rubin Carter looked up at him and said, "Nelson Mandela, I loves you." And I always wish I had the courage to say the same. And I swear I'm telling the truth.
Such a beautiful image of a very, very powerful, impressive woman herself in a room of such tall, impressive men, but holding her own.
In fact, I love that story because it's like history and your own life intersecting. They're really rare junctures. It's beautifully told.
This is Homespun, presented by ABC Radio Melbourne. We're on your radio and video streaming online via the ABC Radio Melbourne website and Facebook.
Now, our next guest grew up on a cattle farm in lush green Gippsland. And as a primary school teacher in rural Victoria, she loves nothing more than to read to her class under the shade of a big spotty gum. Megan Woolfe entered Homespun to share her experience of losing her father 5 years ago.
When I was young, my dad told me that four-leaf clovers are very rare, and if you find one, they're meant to bring you good luck. I've found 76 in the past 5 years. Yep, 76. I don't actually tell people this because I doubt that they'll believe me, but I swear I'm telling you the truth. Despite what you might be thinking, I don't sit in the grass searching for them for hours. I just see them, like on the side of the path when I'm going for a walk, when I'm taking my bins out, or when I'm mowing the lawn. I'm convinced my findings are far more than exceptional good luck, and I'll tell you why. As a kid, I was always out on the farm helping Dad before he even asked I'd be out there. At 12 years old, I was driving the tractor with him on the back yelling at me to slow down or watch out for that rabbit hole. I still remember the day that I first watched Dad bury his hand down a cow's rear end all the way up to his elbow. I was so grossed out, but I was also kind of fascinated. Gripping onto two bony legs, he tied the rope around them tightly. Then we both held onto the rope and pulled as hard as we could. Through squinted eyes, I watched the calf emerge and the limp bundle fell to the ground. We watched as the little creature spluttered, its nostrils flaring, taking in its first breaths. This was life at its rawest, and it was the first of many calves we saved together. Out in the wide open paddocks with my dad, I felt so happy and at ease. We'd work away fixing fences, cutting down fallen trees, or rounding up cattle. We'd talk and joke and he'd tell me he couldn't have done it without my help, and I'd beam. When Dad told me he was sick, sheer panic surged through me, and I tried with all my might to hold back tears, but silently they ran down my cheeks. I brushed them away, desperate to hide them from him. Before he left for chemo, I gave him a four-leaf clover that I'd found when I was a kid. "For good luck," I said. He put it into the front pocket of his shirt and gave me a smile and a wink. The next few months were a haze for all of us. Dad had been a very active, self-confessed workaholic. He was always doing something. Suddenly he was sleeping all day and all night, and waking only to eat or sometimes to watch TV for half an hour. One day I went into his bedroom and he woke and said to me, "Do you want to help me feed the hay out after I've had a little nap, Megs?" "Sure," I replied, swallowing. I wanted so much for him to be out there on the farm in his ripped green overalls, throwing the hay and watching the cows eat it. A few days after Dad died, Mum and I were choosing the clothes that he'd wear. We folded them up neatly, ready to take to the funeral home. And that's when I saw it. That clover that I had given him, was sitting on his bedside table. I slipped it into the front pocket of his blue checkered shirt and then sat on the bed for ages, crying, as my mind tried to grapple with what had happened. The morning after Dad's funeral, my brother and I were walking down the paddock lane, engulfed in a dark cloud of grief. We stopped and leaned up against a fence, and there, right next to my foot, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I leaned over and gently picked the clover and cradled it in my shaking hand. And a wave of warmth flowed over me. Since then, Dad keeps leaving them for me. On significant days, like Christmas or my mum's birthday, or when I bought my first house. He leaves them for me when I've had good news, or sometimes when I have a problem that I'm struggling to solve. Each time I find one, precious memories of Dad come flooding back, because I know, in my heart, that the 76 four-leaf clovers that I have, tucked away in envelopes, extend far beyond just good luck.
This is Homespun, a special listener storytelling event with Virginia Trioli and David Astle, broadcasting on the ABC Radio Melbourne website and Facebook page.
Such a beautiful story, David.
Wow, it's just a heartbreaker.
It really is. But finding the messages everywhere, I love that.
Yeah, serendipity.
We might find a little echo of that in one story a little later on. Now, our next storyteller is an award-winning writer, editor, teacher and lawyer. She was born in Footscray a month after her parents arrived in Australia from Cambodia. Today, she's the best-selling author of Unpolished Gem and Her Father's Daughter. Her new novel, 100 Days, is released in June. She's one of our very special homespun storytellers today, Alice Pung.
When I was 11 years old, my friend Kylie came over for lunch one day. Now, Kylie loved coming over to our house for lunch because my mum was a real Chinese chef, unlike the, fluorescent orange sweet and sour pork you got at the takeaway or the glow-in-the-dark yellow lemon chicken. You know what I'm talking about. So my mum made the real deal. Instead of dim sims, she made dumplings. And that particular day, my friend came over and she sat down and she was having this deep-fried deliciousness. And she turned to me and said, "What is this, Alice?" And I said, "Oh, just eat it. It's just good stuff." And she said, but what is it? I've never had anything like it before. It tastes familiar, and it isn't familiar. And my dad said, "Oh, Kylie, that's octopus." Now, this was before the time that calamari was popular in pubs, and we had sushi that was very common in Australia. So she stopped eating and she looked a bit distressed and she said, well, what do you mean octopus? My dad said, that's an octopus tentacle that you're eating there. And Kylie stopped eating and she said, that's disgusting. That's gross. How could you feed me something like that? It's a sick joke. What is this? And I said, you liked it, Kylie. You were loving it before you found out what it was. What's your problem? And my dad had a glint in his eye. And some of you might have funny dads, or dads who think that they're funny. They think they can tell funny stories. And usually funny dads tell stories about their formative years, you know, back when they met the Beatles or when they were Metallica fans. Now, unfortunately for me, my problem was twofold. I had a dad who thought he was funny, but his formative years were spent surviving the killing fields of Cambodia. So when my dad's eyes lit up, I said, Dad, no, whatever you're going to say, it's not appropriate. My dad said, you haven't even heard what I'm going to say. And my mum said, yes, don't interrupt your dad. And my dad said, oh, you know, this isn't the worst thing that anyone's ever eaten, is it, Kylie? I'll tell you about something. And I said, no, Dad, no, not that story. And I knew what he was going to say. And my mother said, don't interrupt your dad. And my mum nudged my dad and said, tell Kylie that when you were surviving those killing fields of Cambodia, you were so skinny that if he breathed inwards, you could feel your backbone through your stomach. So my dad told her that. And my dad said, listen, people were dropping off like flies. And what was happening was, you know, people were starving to death. And if you dug in the ground and you found a tarantula, you know, big hairy spiders, if they popped out, the men around you, who were also skin and bones, would look at you as if you caught a big fat barramundi because you had protein that day and they didn't. And so my father said, listen, I was down on my last legs, didn't know whether I would be standing or, you know, horizontal that day. And so I had this one remaining possession, which is a belt my father wore around his waist. Of course, he had no need for it because he was so thin. So he cut it into tiny, tiny strips and he boiled it for hours on end. And then he called the only two surviving members of his family he knew were alive at that time, my grandmother and his sister. And he said, here, taste this. And my grandmother said, what kind of animal is this from? And he said, don't ask any questions. And my auntie's chewing for 2 minutes and says, this animal's a bit tough. How long has it been dead for? My dad said, just eat it. And that belt, which expanded in their stomachs, kept them going for the next day or so until they could find more food. Because if you couldn't feel full, you couldn't work. And if you couldn't work, you were executed. So when my dad finished that story, I noticed my friend Kylie completely silent. And, you know, I had this thing about my parents being not only immigrants but refugees. So when he first mentioned the belt, I thought, Dad, no one eats a belt. He can't even speak English properly. So she's completely silent and she's quiet when I walk her home. And I thought, oh, this is too much. You know, she's got this story. What's she going to do with it? She's going to dine out on it. On Monday morning at school, I know she is. So I made her swear to secrecy. And I said, you know, Kylie, that Dad told you this story. I'm sorry he did. And she said, what do you mean you're sorry? You're sorry. That's the best story ever. I've never met anyone who survived terrible things like that. Your dad's a legend. You're so rude to him. This story is the stuff show and tell is made of. And I thought, no, you can't tell this story. I won't be your friend if you tell me this story to class, you know. Cross your heart and hope to die. Stick a needle in your eye that you won't tell this story. And she promised me. And so I was, you know, assuaged. I thought, okay. Went home, and that Monday morning when I got to school, I saw her, Kylie, surrounded by a group of kids. And I thought, oh no, my heart dropped to my stomach. And I thought she's going to tell the story for sure. And I stepped in and I heard her say, you'll never believe what happened. I swear I'm telling you the truth. And I thought, oh no, you'll never believe what happened to me this weekend. And the other kids were around her saying, what? And she said, I ate a bloody octopus tentacle.
And of course, David, a lot of octopus and calamari, if not cooked correctly, taste about as tough as a belt.
As for embarrassing fathers or fathers who think they're funny, I have no idea what she's talking about. Now, Boort is a rural town 90 kilometres northwest of Bendigo. In fact, I was there about 6 weeks ago, and that's exactly where our next storyteller is from. He lives on a farm with his wife, 4 children and a few sheep. And if you're local, you will spot him on the back of a lawnmower maintaining the beautiful gardens throughout the Shire. Bradley Hoare told us that he entered Homespun because, well, he just loves spinning a yarn.
That's right. I am from Boort, and it's a very pretty little community, and it's a wonderful little town. Boort's known as the Northern Oasis. It's a nice little green spot, and the town's built around a spectacular lake. But like most small rural country towns, it is completely obsessed with sport. To really fit into this little town, you have to have an unforgettable sporting moment, a fantastic sporting story. Now, unfortunately for me, this is quite difficult, as I'm well known to have the coordination of a shopping trolley with 3 dodgy wheels. Back in the day at school, sporting activities, they were compulsory, especially when it was an inter-school sporting competition. And normally I would book an optometrist appointment for those days, just so I could not turn up. But as luck would have it, no appointments available for that day. Tried to fake a sickie, Mum still made me go. So I'm off to school, I'm lining up for my very first game of football, and I was exceptionally nervous. The coach said to me, go out to such and such a position. He was speaking a completely foreign language to me. I just looked for a blank spot right on the other side of the ground where I could head. So I trundled over there, very, very, very nervous about the game and that the ball would come to me. I'm watching the ball whiz from end to end, goals getting kicked at both ends, and the quarter-time whistle blew. Absolute relief. All my teammates are completely ecstatic. We're just ahead. I'm completely ecstatic. The ball hadn't come anywhere near me. I head back to the bench. That's safety zone. I've had a go. I get to sit down, read a book, game finishes, all good. But unfortunately, the coach spots me, says, Bradley, mate, you didn't get much of a go, did you? How about, look, just head out again, 5 minutes, have a go. You'll be right, mate. Oh, go on, off you go, go on. Anyway, begrudgingly, I head out again. And that's when my worst nightmare happened. There was a wayward kick. The ball comes straight to me. I've got the ball. That is not good. What can I do? Look, I'll just start heading towards the goals. I'll run that way. It'll be fine. Look, in practice, when you start running, somebody comes and assaults you, or tackles you, and rips the ball away. All good, ball's gone, crumpled heap, fine. Yep, so off I start running. Something seriously wrong. Nobody's caught up to me, and I'm not a fast runner. And I remember every 5 steps or so you have to bounce this ball. Now, football's very poorly designed, sort of egg shape. You bounce it, and it just racks off to one side. Never, ever, ever comes back. Anyway, sort of 3, 4 steps, 5 steps, bounce. Struth, it came back. I'm in uncharted territory. Anyway, so 4, 5, 6, bounce, comes straight back. Unbelievable. Now, I'm starting to think that maybe I've sold myself a little bit short. I might be a natural at this game. And I bounce again, come straight back. And I swear I'm telling you the truth. And I look up and I had a religious experience. It was like Moses parting the Red Sea. The opposition were parting before me as I was heading towards the goals. I'm bouncing this ball and it's coming back, and all the opposition, they're just scattering. And I'm thinking, wow, like, this is good. And I can hear all my teammates yelling, go Bradley, go, go Bradley, go. And I'm bouncing and I get close to the goals. I drop the ball onto my boot and it's just like it's in slow motion. The ball comes off my boot and it spins and it goes up and straight through the middle of those two big, beautiful posts. Goal! Oh, champion! Oh, I was ecstatic, but it was about then that I realised that go Bradley go sounds a lot like no Bradley no. and all the pats on my back I realised were a volley of punches. And I'm in a crumpled heap on the ground. Instead of being lifted up in a blaze of glory, I'm just covered in bruises on the ground. But it was a valuable learning experience. I did know that you changed which direction you kicked at half time, but now I know you change at quarter time as well. And I now realise that not all sporting moments and unforgettable stories are covered in glory, but mainly and most importantly, I realise you can fit into a community even if you do have the coordination of a shopping trolley with 3 dodgy wheels. Thanks.
David, can I suggest that Bradley stand in for you whenever you might have a night off on evenings? I think he's a natural storyteller.
He does. He's got a very loud shirt too and a good storytelling panache. I'm still trying to work out mathematically how that works if you score for the opposition.
Yeah.
Is that +6 or -1? Or...
I'm pretty sure it's 6 for them and -6 for you. Now, our next storyteller enjoys acting, writing plays and poetry. When she's not on stage, she's working at her local library. She was born in Nigeria, grew up in New Zealand and now calls Melbourne home. Her love of storytelling led Amarachi Okorom to enter Homespun.
So when I was 9, back in New Zealand, I was in primary school, and there was this boy in school, and his name was Jack. Well, we'll call him Jack. And I was obsessed with him. I wanted to be wherever Jack was. Whatever he did, I wanted to do it. And in my head, I thought that if he saw me every single day, he would eventually love me back because he would realize how amazing I was. And when I realized that that wasn't working, I had to come up with another plan. So 9-year-old me, just sitting alone thinking, how can I make this boy fall in love with me? And the only thing I could come up with was walking right up to him, looking him right in the eye, and just saying, Jack, what can I do to make you fall in love with me? And then he looked at me like I was crazy and like I'd said the funniest joke. But when I love someone, I really love them. And I was like, no, I'm not joking. So I still looked at him with this most serious look in my face. And I said, I'm dead serious. I will do anything to make you fall in love with me. And then he thought for a bit. He thought for a few seconds, and he finally gave me an answer. And I thought, great, I can do that. It's a bit weird, but I can do that because if I can have you as my boyfriend, then that's cool. I can do anything. So I remember after school, I followed Jack and his best friend to the toilets. And I remember walking right into the toilet cubicle by myself, and I stared right at that toilet bowl, and I just looked at it, about to run out and just say, no, I don't want to do this. But all I could think about was holding Jack's hand in primary school and holding his hand and being called his girlfriend. I wasn't thinking about the fresh new braids that my mom spent 9 hours doing. I wasn't thinking about any of that. So I looked at the toilet bowl and I dunked my head right into it. And I really just shook my head just so he can see that I loved him. So I ran out of the toilet cubicle and I looked at him right in the face with the biggest smile, and I just had toilet water dripping from my fresh braids. And I just said, I did it. Does this mean you love me? And I remember he looked at me and he started laughing. And all he said was, "Oh, I didn't think you'd actually do it." And I remember being so embarrassed and so deflated. But he promised me. He promised that he wouldn't tell anybody. And obviously, I believed him because this was Jack. Jack is amazing. Jack never lies. So the next day, I rock up to school and I come into my class, and the whole class is just there laughing at me. And I see Jack laughing as well. And instantly I know, okay, Jack told the whole class. And the one thing about me is if anyone's gonna laugh at me, it's gonna be on my own terms. I can't let anyone laugh at me without me laughing at myself as well. So I thought, I'm gonna make jokes about myself as well. I'm gonna call myself Toilet Water Girl. I'm gonna run after my classmates with my braids and pretend to flick the germs onto them. And I was just gonna laugh the loudest at myself. And eventually that worked, and everyone got over it, including me. And I swear that I'm telling you the truth. A few days later, I walked right back up to Jack, and I looked him right in the eye, and I said, "It's okay. I still love you. I'm still gonna wait. Whatever you need, I'll be here waiting for you." And he just laughed, and he called me crazy. And I probably was, but I just look back at that story, and I know that you're probably thinking, "Oh my God, that's so sad. That's so humiliating. You must be so humiliated." And to be honest, when I think about that story and when I look back at that story, I just see a little 9-year-old girl who had so much confidence to walk right up to the boy she liked and just tell him how she felt about him. And I just think about how now that I'm older, I care too much about what people think about me. I care about the way I talk, the way I walk, and just anything that I do. But 9-year-old Amarachi walked up to a boy and told her she loved him and she was going to wait for him. And I wish that I could go back to being that confident little girl again.
This is Homespun, a special listener storytelling event with Virginia Trioli and David Astle, broadcasting on the ABC Radio Melbourne website and Facebook page.
One of the most amazing stories we received, that one, David.
Really is. In fact, the schoolyard, I have to say, is one of the most kind of traumatic and kind of character-making petri dishes there is.
And interesting how the schoolyard actually came back again and again in so many of the stories we received. You're watching Homespun, presented by ABC Radio Melbourne, a storytelling event where our listeners share their stories on stage with you. We're on your radio and streaming online via the ABC Radio Melbourne website and Facebook.
Now, we first met her on The Big Gig and Let the Blood Run Free. And since then, she's continued to make us laugh and ponder about the fallibilities of life with her columns, her books, her theatre work and her stand-up. She is the author of You're Still Hot to Me, The Joys of Menopause, and her latest book is We Need to Talk About Mum and Dad, a comprehensive guide to parenting our ageing parents. Another very special guest with Homespun is Jean Kittson.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Hello. My story is entitled The Day the Queen Met Me. I was graciously happy to meet the Queen, mainly because of the enormous advantage it would give me in that 6 degrees of separation game. Because the Queen has met absolutely everyone, and if I met the Queen, I would be like 2, maybe 3 degrees separated from Churchill, Marilyn Monroe, Stalin, and most importantly, Julie Andrews. Well, the Queen and I, we go way back to primary school. Her portrait hung in every classroom, all diamonds and satin, radiant, serene, glowing, beautiful but not too beautiful. She was like a calm version of your own mother on a good day after she'd had her hair done and won a fight with your father. And every morning at primary school, I would stand at the flagpole and sing God Save Our Gracious Queen, from what I was not quite sure. long live our noble Queen, which is working a treat. And I'm happy to help. Admittedly, long to reign over us, I thought was a sort of formal request to stop the droughts or something. I wasn't quite sure. But I certainly knew for certain that I was one of her subjects, like geography or domestic science. So she knew all about me. And I was really, so I wasn't totally surprised when I graciously opened her email and it said, "The Queen is visiting Australia and she would like to meet you." Yes, well, not me specifically, but she wanted to meet a pioneer donor of umbilical cord blood. And that was me and my daughter, Charlie. We donated our umbilical cord blood to the Cord Blood Bank about 18 months beforehand. And the Queen is apparently hugely interested in cutting-edge medical discoveries, and she wanted to know all about the Cord Blood Bank. She wanted to meet a donor, step forward, my daughter, Charlie and I, and she wanted to meet a recipient of cord blood cells and meet some of the remarkable researchers. This was an Australian discovery that the blood in cord blood, the cells were stem cells. The blood was stem cells, and they're very adaptable and they can be used to save lives, mainly to treat young people with leukemia. So the Queen wanted to meet us all and also do a tour of the Cord Blood Bank. And that was technically rather difficult because there wasn't one as such. The Cord Blood Bank was actually a cryogenic sort of receptacle in the corner of a laboratory at Prince of Wales Children's Hospital, and it was in a room full of researchers, working on something else. But no one says no to the Queen, so they found a spare room and they filled it full of dynamic-looking medical equipment and a fax machine, and they located some dry ice and they laminated a sign for the door, "The Cord Blood Bank. Please remove your motorcycle helmet." And there we all were, all lined up and all dressed up, and we were waiting expectantly, excitedly. My daughter Charlie on my hip, she was getting noticeably restless, I have to say. But then at last, there was a flurry of flunkies, and a senior flunky came in and said, "The Queen approaches." And then the flunky told us, so you've got to, he said, "Don't ask the Queen any questions. Don't make any comments. Just answer the question. Refer to Her Majesty as Your Majesty. And after that, ma'am as in spam, not ma'am as in chicken palmy." And it was then that I had my first sort of clench of nerves. I thought, am I prepared for this? I had a blow dry and I've got a nice white suit on. But, and I decided I couldn't really curtsy with Charlie on my hip because I might stumble over like, the mother of a bride after a few drinks and a missing shoe. And I didn't want to do that. But was I going to be too casual? And then suddenly the Queen was in front of me. And I sort of did this sort of bob, squinchy, noddy thing. And I said, "Hello, you're ma'am." The Queen said, "So you are a donor?" And I went, "Oh, yes, I know the answer to this one." And just as I was about to reply, Charlie, who's, about 20 months old, she made a lunge for the Queen's hat. I don't know what it is about babies' hands, but they seem to extend an improbable distance from their tiny bodies like a trick clown hand, reaching out to seize the moment, or in this case, a royal blue sombrero with a feather. Well, the Queen did this sort of duck dodge, as agile and graceful as a ninja. And Charlie thwarted her alien tentacle little hand, retracted into a little lace sleeve. And horrified, I said, "Charlie!" Well, Charlie didn't actually appreciate my tone, so she turned around and with her tiny little fist, she grasped my bottom lip. And she held my own litter, and then she slowly dragged my dramatic red lipstick all the way down my chin and down the front. I'm not going to do it. My white suit. The Queen sort of turned her radiance up to 11 and bunged in a bit of empathy. And then she asked me a question in Latin about algebra. And I answered by singing a sea shanty. Probably. I don't know. I can't remember. You know, embarrassment and shock is like that. You can't remember. But I did remember that she shot a look at Charlie as if to say, nice try with the hat, kid. And then she moved on to the very dignified young cord blood recipient who was standing beside us, who didn't try to snatch her hat and even bowed without farting. Which is why he is on the Queen's Christmas list and we're not. And I swear, as the Queen is my witness, that I'm telling you the truth. Thank you.
Oh, now she can curtsy. So now she manages the curtsy.
One is very amused by that story.
If it went any more smoothly with Jean Kittson, you'd be disappointed.
You would be, yeah,
exactly.
I do. I love the grammar of the title too. The day the Queen met me, I think that told us all.
Exactly.
So on radio and streaming online, this is Homespun, the storytelling event where we asked you to tell us your story, where you swear you're telling the truth.
Now, our next guest grew up on Whadjuk Boojau land in Perth and now lives on Wurundjeri land in Footscray. Sam's a lawyer and podcaster who loves bookshops and dog walks. Sam's a huge fan of the ABC's Law Report and he pitched the story to Homespun to get as close to being on the show as possible. Nice try. Sam Elkin.
Life is weird. Sometimes it can feel like it's a massive game of snakes and ladders, just a series of disconnected, lucky or unlucky events. When something particularly unexpected happens to you, sometimes you can feel like the whole world is against you. But strangely enough, sometimes it's those kind of events that happen to you in life are the very ones that put you on the path that you need to get on to get where you need to go in life. And something like that happened to me recently. But before I tell you that, let me take you back to the beginning. So, transitioning is a strange experience. It can be very stressful sometimes. You're often thinking for many, many years before you decide to transition about it privately. And after a long time of internal anguish, you tell other people. And you reach out and you tell, say, for example, your work colleagues. And when I did this, I have to say that my colleagues were extraordinarily supportive. They were like, Sam, I'm so proud of you. It's such a wonderful journey that you're going on. How could we support you? Should we use a pronoun round in the next team meeting? But nonetheless, there are many ways in which transitioning, particularly at work, can be very stressful. There's the issue of paperwork, for example. Just imagine trying to update all of your utility bills, logging into your MyGov account to change your ATO account, and not to mention dealing with payroll, who don't have the best bedside manner at the best of times. So I had to call up and speak to Tony and say, hi, Tony, it's Sam here from Level 9. I just wanted to know if you could update my gender marker on my payroll records. And Tony's like, gender what? And then you have to spend the next 10 minutes like explaining to Tony what a gender marker is, giving him an absolute crash course in gender studies when you literally just wanted to update one letter on your payroll record. Then there's the strange experience of using the men's toilets for the first time. So you're walking into the men's toilets, trying not to make a big deal out of things. And you bump into Derek, for example, and you say, and you look down and Derek looks at you and thinks, wow, you're in here. And you just have this weird little flicker of understanding that something new and novel has happened. And then you both look down and try and act like this isn't a new thing that's just happened. And you walk away. So after about 5 months of all of this stress going on, I decided I absolutely just need a holiday. And so my partner and I decided to spare no expense, and we booked ourselves a lavish overseas holiday to try and get some space and unwind. We had an awesome holiday. I got to bob around on the beach in Sicily, had a great time, beautiful dinners, the whole thing. But like all good things, it had to come to an end, and I flew back to Melbourne. And when I got to Melbourne Airport, the first thing I did, of course, is order a coffee. I was dying for an Australian flat white. And the barista, when he gave it to me, said, "There you go, mate," in that really weird and very specific Australian way that men say mate to one another. And I realised at that moment, wow, I must actually pass now. And as I walked over to the long-term car parking to pick up my car, I thought to myself, wow, that's huge, you know? And at the same time, it really struck me. I just felt this massive wave of dysphoria about my chest, and I thought it's so awkward for me to be perceived as male while still having a feminine chest. And it really dawned on me at that moment that, you know, I need chest surgery yesterday. And I was incredibly frustrated at myself at that moment because I was just like, didn't I just blow all my money on a massive overseas holiday that I actually could have used for this surgery that I need so much? And so I was in the car and I was driving myself home, and I was tired and jet lagged and really beating myself up about all this, thinking, how am I going to come up with $10,000 to get this chest surgery now that I've spent all my money? When bang, there was a massive car accident right behind me. A car banged into me, and then it flung me into the middle of the intersection, and I hit the car in front of me. And this just completely spun me out. I was not predicting this, and I just thought, how unlucky can I be? I've only been back in Melbourne for literally 1 hour, and I've already gotten into a car accident. There was this sleepy civil engineering student who came out of the back of the car. He was uninjured, and he said to me, you know, it's all right, mate. Don't worry about anything. I've got you covered. I've got comprehensive car insurance. And I thought, car insurance. And at that moment, I realised that I was in a bit of a different situation than I originally thought. What I thought was a really unlucky incident was actually giving me the potential of getting a payout if only my car got written off. So I was looking at my car, it's, you know, really crumpled bonnet and it's really stuck in behind, and thinking, this car could absolutely be written off right now. You know, I might have to be a public transport user from now on, but I could be a flat-chested public transport user. How wonderful. And I swear I'm telling you the truth, that's exactly what happened. This is how I got my $10,000 for chest surgery. So, I had my surgery in the leafy eastern suburbs of Melbourne, going to one of the few surgeons that actually do this stuff in Australia, and I had my transformative surgery. I came out of theatre, I was tired, sore, immensely relieved that I'd been able to do this. The next day, my partner picked me up and drove me home. And I saw that place where I'd had that fateful accident, and I thought, you know what? What I thought was a snake was really a ladder. This was a moment that was pushing me up to the top of the board. How wonderful. And isn't it weird that sometimes you can think that something really unlucky has happened to you, and it's actually quite a lucky thing. And sometimes it's just a matter of perspective to help you find that out.
Sometimes the universe has a plan, David.
Oh, I love the snakes and ladders analogy. It's so
beautiful,
true.
really nice. You're listening to and watching Homespun, where we invite our listeners to step onto this stage and tell us their story. With that line, I swear I'm telling you the truth.
Now, from Hamilton, not so far from Boort, in Victoria, to the MCG, Liam Picken was one of the Western Bulldogs' most popular players. He was crucial to that glorious AFL Premiership win in 2016. What a match that was. And today, he is a husband and father of 3 young children and a fierce advocate for stricter rules around concussion. Just last year, in fact, he announced that he would posthumously donate his brain to assist future research. Our final guest storyteller is Liam Picken.
When we're kids, we're asked to believe in fairy tales. When I was young, I believed in them too, or at least my own. My dream was playing AFL football at the highest level, and one day, if I was lucky enough to run out and play in an AFL grand final. Like all good fairy tales, in mine, I was the underdog. No one gave me a chance. The critics told me I was too small, wasn't fast enough, and wasn't skillful enough. I was overlooked in the draft 4 times, but lucky enough, at the age of 22, I was rookie listed. Like all good fairy tales, the underdog has to work hard. So I did. I worked really hard. I put my head down and I trained. And I rose beyond my wildest dreams. And finally, after all that hard work, the sacrifices, and proving to my critics what I was made of, the dream as a kid, all those years ago, had arrived. As I stood at the race at the MCG, I took a deep breath and I ran out in the Bulldogs jumper in the 2016 AFL Grand Final. I knew this was better than any dream I had as a kid. I stood beside the boys wearing the red, white and blue as we held up the Premiership Cup, breaking a 6-2 drought for our small club in the western suburbs. I kicked 3 goals and was awarded Best Finals Player, but best of all, my kids got to run out in the ground after seeing their dad live out his childhood dream and play in the red, white and blue confetti. When we're kids, we're asked to believe in fairy tales. And when I was young, I believed in them too. But what most of us aren't told, there's a lot more to those stories. What happened to that footballer whose dreams come true at the AFL on that day? I woke up in the change rooms. I didn't know where I was. It took me some time, but I slowly realised I'd been knocked out. This was like no other concussion. A high-speed impact injury completely knocked me out. It was a sight my teammates and family had witnessed 12 months before. And just like that, life can change. A fairy tale immediately turned into something I didn't recognise. I entered what seemed a faraway world. I was isolated in my bedroom with no screens, no light, and disconnected from the world. Everything suddenly made me feel sick. The light, movement, noise, and even thinking. Well, what happened to me? Well, I stayed in darkness for that week, and then that turned to 1 month, and then into 12 months. One doctor then turned into a team of specialists. Too many to count. But nothing seemed to be helping. I was trapped with this headache. I'd wake up in the morning with this headache and go to sleep with a headache. My headache turned into chronic pain. It was a pain that no one else could see. I tried so many different types of treatments and specialists. The most confronting thing with this injury is you analyse your own brain every day. You look for improvements or little setbacks. But soon I realised I had to rewire my brain and create new neurological pathways. And as I slowly improve, I wonder if that another fairy tale could be dreamed again. Could I be that player that returned from serious injury to come back and succeed? To have another shot at glory, to win another premiership? A training session here or there was followed by a burst of improvement, but then another setback. Surely my dream would end in a victorious comeback. The story I'd seen before. Could that fairy tale be mine again? But it dawned on me. My last game wasn't going to see me carried off in victory by my teammates. No, I was carried off with a stretcher from the trainers when I was unconscious. I don't remember my last game, and I was left with part of the story we don't often talk about, we don't often see. The fairy tale that we don't speak about or share with our friends. The part of the story when you realise real strength is required. That the real story had just begun. We glorify athletes and admire their strength so publicly. There's no denying it takes incredible strength and courage and dedication for sports people to reach the top. However, what I've learned, it takes a very special and different type of courage to get through serious injury. Hidden away in the shadows, there is strength that is developed when your back's against the wall. There's no one cheering you on, there's no crowds, there's no awards, and there's no one to pat you on the back. It's just you, finding your way out. I swear I'm telling the truth when I say there's a fairy tale or lesson waiting for you in some times in places we're not taught to look. They have found in the hardest times of our life that we don't often speak enough about, that no one will celebrate because no one has seen you at your finest. The real victory is gained from travelling a road that we never imagined we'd have to walk on.
I love that. I love a story that flips the idea of a fairy tale on its head and actually points out that that fairy tale is one that we can all achieve, but in a very different way.
What an important voice, what an important story, and such a great player who's sort of going now a great ambassador.
This is Homespun, a special listener storytelling event with Virginia Trioli and David Astle, broadcasting on the ABC Radio Melbourne website and Facebook page.
So I'm looking at my watch and I'm doing my maths, which is always a little bit wonky, and I think we've got time for one more story. What do you think? Yeah. It's absolutely my pleasure to introduce, with a story to share, Virginia Trioli.
Well, it was a lovely late summer morning, warm still with soft low cloud that, you know, when you feel that shining light behind it, you know it's going to burn off and turn out to be an absolutely beautiful day. My son and husband were out at those endless Saturday morning rounds of sport, which meant that I had a few precious hours to myself. So I took myself around the corner to a little laneway cafe. Now, this little ritual these days is always a little bit sad for me because normally my big, buffy chocolate lab called Bunk would come with me and spend the entire time sniffing every single corner, every cobblestone in that alleyway, trying to find the roast chicken that had been left there for him. Sadly, he never found that roast chicken, and he wore the eternally disappointed face of the dog that never found one. He was the sweetest dog. He did not have a bad bone in his body. I only ever heard him bark around about 4 times in his whole life. He had a big, boxy head. He had liquid hazel eyes and velvet ears the colour of dairy milk chocolate. All of which is to say that he was a completely gorgeous dog, but truly, and I say this with great love, he was as dumb as a box of hair. He was a Labrador retriever, but never figured out how to retrieve a stick from the sea without swallowing litres of water as he swam back into shore. He regarded voice commands as purely advisory, and he once tried to eat an entire pile of chicken manure. I'm sorry, he didn't try, he ate the entire pile of chicken manure. We drove him home in the car from the farm that day. It was a lovely drive. The day that Bunk tried to eat my husband's mobile phone, but only gave up halfway through when it started ringing, was the day that I realised that we didn't get one of the smart ones. Bunk came into our lives as a failed show dog. And do you know what his apparent failings were? He had a slight bend in his tail and he had a small white pigment mark on his nose. And that was it. In the ruthless world of the show, that was enough to excommunicate him. I'm sad to say that we lost our beautiful dog Bunk at Christmas. An inoperable tumour, a sad family discussion, and then that dreadful last visit to Lord Smith Hospital to sit with Bunk as he left us. And there is no varnishing that experience, is there? I still come downstairs every single morning and expect to find him there. His presence is very strong in our lives. So there I was that Saturday morning recently on my own, sipping my coffee, chatting with a friend on FaceTime. I had the 2 hands going, when up rushes to me Bunk. It was a chocolate Labrador straining on the owner's leash, almost pulling her over with the strength, trying urgently to get to me. Only me, out of a crowd of people, this dog comes rushing up to me. He pushed his head into my lap. He looked up at me with those liquid hazel eyes, those same hazel eyes. I looked down at him and I promptly burst into tears. Now, you've got to picture this. I'm sitting in a public lane. I've got a coffee in one hand. I've got my friend on FaceTime on the other. I've got a dog in my lap. I'm kind of wailing over and over. I realise now, Bunk, it's you. The dog's owner is looking at me with wide eyes and sort of throwing help me glances over her shoulder at everybody else drinking their morning coffee. My friend's on the phone. She's got total vision over all of this and she's thinking that I'm going absolutely mad. I recovered enough to explain to the dog's owner that I had just lost my own chocolate lab and that this dog looked exactly like him. And then I looked again, and I swear I'm telling you the truth, but this chocolate lab had a bend in his tail and one small white pigment mark on his soft brown nose. He was looking at me. He was really looking at me in that way that only a thoughtful dog can, those eyes beseeching me to understand something. There was a moment that passed between us. There was perhaps a message passed between us, and then it was gone. I apologised to the bemused owner and they went on their way. I was raised Catholic, but I'm afraid the whole idea of life eternal and the resurrection never really made sense to me. As friends of mine became intrigued through the years by Eastern religion and Buddhism with their promise of reincarnation, I always rolled my eyes, and I probably would still roll my eyes. But maybe the border between this place and another is a little more porous than I thought. Maybe messages get through, and in the most surprising and wonderful ways. And maybe the deep love of a very kind and very sweet dog is that bridge between the two places.
Debunking religion, Virginia Trioli.
Now, please keep your applause going for all of our incredible storytellers this evening. Linelle Gibson, Megan Woolfe, Alice Pung, Bradley Hall, Amarachi Okorom, Jean Kittson, Sam Elkin and Liam Picken. Storytellers, take a bow.
And our studio audience has spoken. We asked them to tell us their favourite story from the 5 listeners who took the stage to tell us their favourite story with the line, "I swear I'm telling you the truth."
So I'm delighted to announce the winner of Homespun 2021 is Bradley Hall.
This has been Homespun 2021, presented by ABC Radio Melbourne on radio and online. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.